The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I am the host, Andy Steele, and it is going to be an honor today to be joined again by Paul Laurudee. He's an Iranian-born American political activist who is a major figure in the pro-Palestinian movement. Based in San Francisco Bay Area, he's involved with the International Solidarity Movement and was a founder of the Free Gaza Movement and Free Palestine Movement, along with so many other groups and associations. I introduced him last time he was here on the show as a rock star activist or something like that. And we're going to be talking about movements overall. It is a long, hard road for people that care about what's going on in the world. You know, you watch movies about people trying to make a difference. It gives you this impression that it all gets wrapped up in 2 or 3 hours through a few simple actions. And then you get into the real world and you find out it's nothing like that. It is a long, tough struggle. And the people fighting in the Palestinian rights and freedoms movement have endured it, and we can take some lessons from those folks, especially in the face of what's going on now, and of course related to our issue, which is the trying to get some justice here on the controlled demolition evidence, showing those towers right there were brought down in explosive demolition. So I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to bring our guest in. Paul, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Freefall today.
Pleasure to be with you, Andy, and with everyone else.
Absolutely. Now, it's not been a long time since you've been on this show, but just for newcomers, remind our audience about your work as an activist.
Well, I've been active since I was young in many different movements, including the civil rights movement. I'm old enough to have belonged to that. And but very early, in fact, in 1965, I got involved. I got introduced to the Palestinian issue. And because my father was living in Jordan at the time and I was visiting him. And so I've been active, at least to some extent, all that time. And during part of that time, very active. In fact, let's say in the last 20 years or so, I've been very active. So I think you covered it pretty well. I'm still active, at least in terms of things I can do while sitting down, although I recently made a trip to Cairo to try to do something about what's happening in Gaza. And I will travel when it's necessary and possible for me. But a lot of my activity is done on the computer and internet and so forth, like most people these days.
There's a lot of important work that gets done on the computer. Of course, our work involves a lot of writing, a lot of observing, researching, filing, Freedom of Information Act requests and such. But there's also a lot of great work that gets done on the ground there. And it is dangerous to go over to foreign countries. For instance, protesting. I remember there was a girl, I cannot remember her name off the top of my head, but she had a blog.
Rachel Corrie.
Well, there was Rachel Corrie too, yes, and she was run over by the bulldozer standing up against, I think it was the demolition of homes going on over in Gaza. But also there was this girl who was just there at a protest, and the soldiers fired and hit her in the eye, took her eye out.
Yes.
And she was featured on various news sites. And, it's devastating for an artist to lose half their sight because that was her thing. That's what she did. But she continued on her art and continued on her blog and her work. And I always remember that. And it just seems that some of the rules, well, you can say they don't apply sometimes here in the United States, but some of the rules especially don't apply when you're protesting against Israel or other forces out there. So it's dangerous to go overseas and personally interject yourself in those things, as you documented last time on this show, because you were physically assaulted.
Yeah, I was physically assaulted, and even recently, as I say, in Cairo, I was arrested along with the most of the members of the small group, and Chris Hedges was among them. He and I were in jail together in Cairo, not for long. We weren't overnight, but we didn't know what was going to happen with that. We might have been expelled from the country and all that sort of thing. But it's not the same necessarily, although this was in some ways not so different from being arrested in the U.S.
Right. But again, if you really believe in something deep enough, you got to walk the walk. And, there's so many people out there who like to virtue signal. They hear some issue on the news, for instance, for, a week, and they might, voice their opinion here and there, but to actually get involved, that is what the system is afraid of. They are afraid of people getting out from behind the computer screens, getting out of their homes, going and getting personally involved in these things, or just having the courage through their computer screens to speak out when they see injustice being done. And I've seen it myself just through that.
Well, a good point you were making is that in 2010 especially, although also on a couple of other occasions, I was beaten, and I had bruises all over my body and treated not so well in 2010. One of maybe 750 or more people, between 750 and 800 people that were part of the flotilla to Gaza. But let's face it, no matter how badly they treat me or anyone else, it really doesn't compare with the things they do to people who, as far as they're concerned, don't matter. And such as the people who were in the towers on 9/11. Those people didn't matter. And the same is true with the Palestinians in spades. I mean, they really don't matter. Men, women, children, they can be slaughtered in vast numbers, what the Israelis call mowing the grass. And it can, and I fully expect that by the time this is done, we'll be counting over 100,000 deaths. There may already be 100,000 deaths. We don't know, because there are so many deaths that don't get recorded. But it could be hundreds of thousands, or in the worst case, even more than 1 million.
Yes, and not to mention the psychological ramifications of people who manage to survive this current assault happening, and that's to put it mildly. That's going to live with them forever, just like the people who survived September 11th have psychological impacts on their psyche and all of this, and continue to remember it. And I want to bring it back to a point that you just made, because about you think, like, when I first started this, most people would resist the scientific evidence that 9/11 Truth brings forth, partly because they just can't believe that anybody would do this. They can believe that Muslim terrorists will crash planes into buildings as part of their jihad or whatever, because that's what they're told on the television set. But when you say that other nefarious forces, possibly from the government, put explosives in the towers and deliberately brought this attack upon our own nation themselves, they can't reason that somebody would do this to their fellow human being, that those sources could not do this. But now, here in 2020, well, beginning in 23 and 24, we're seeing the brutality of humanity fully on display as people are targeted in Gaza. People who have nothing to do with the conflict, women, children, innocent bystanders, and it takes South Africa standing up at the UN to even get any kind of legal action going on this. We're going to comment on that later, but I want you to address this concept from all of your years of experience. How does this happen? How does this happen in the minds of the adversary, where you can look at a group of people, whether they be Americans on September 11th, or they be the people in Palestine, as collateral damage in an operation that they consider to be for the greater good? How does that happen in someone's mind?
I'm just working on that myself. I'm coming to the realization, because for many, many years, I thought, with all the horrible things happening in Palestine that go back decades. For example, there was a young American citizen, Palestinian origin, Hamad, I've forgotten what his last name was, 16 years old, who was stopped in Jerusalem by some Israeli settlers, and they doused him with, I guess, gasoline, and then they poured it down his throat. They poured it down his throat, and then they lit him on fire, and he died. And this got covered in the media, but he was Palestinian, so he didn't count quite as much. He was Palestinian American, but he didn't count quite as. His brother also was very badly beaten, and his face was totally misshapen as a result. And there was a baby in a village near where I was staying in Palestine back in 2005 or something. Who the house was burnt down by settlers, and they deliberately made sure the baby was inside and died from the fire. And then afterwards, there were parties among the settlers filmed where they were dancing and saying, Ali, the name of the kid, was Ali is now fully broiled, cooked. It was just, all of these horrifying things, and many, many more. But these were isolated, and they may have happened every month, and there were other incidents that happened that were quite as horrible. But I kept thinking to myself, one of these days, a whole settlement is going to go crazy and massacre a whole town of Palestinians, and then people are going to react. Well, I was wrong, because here is the entire nation of Israel talking about how we have to kill them all in Gaza, and how we have to level the land and start from the beginning and resettle it because nobody will be on it, and things like this. And this, I didn't realize that it was possible to do this in this day and age. I was aware that it happened when communication was not as instantaneous and as widespread as it is now. But for that to happen and that applies to 9/11 as well. The idea that our own government, because all the evidence points to our own government creating this false flag event for the benefit of George Bush and the powers behind him, and in order to give the the consent to start a war with Iraq and other wars, which were described by General, who was on Democracy Now! And talked about 7 countries in 5 years that would be overturned and destroyed, in effect. This is all for these motivations, without any regard for how many people are killed, who is killed, and for just for selfish purposes, for power hungry or money hungry, which is the same thing, purposes. It's just extraordinary. But At least it woke me up. This genocide in Gaza woke me up. That there's nothing that's impossible, which makes me wonder if the destruction of the world is just around the corner, because that's also thinkable by many people.
Well, we certainly have the capacity to do it now. I mean, from what I read, the Satan II missile out of Russia, and I'm not picking on Russia here because the United States has their own, but according to the news reports, it can take out an area the size of Texas. I'm no expert on nuclear weapons, but that sounds pretty scary to me. A couple of those would take us out pretty well. And so the potential is there for things to get out of control. And as they stir the pot more and more, we get closer and closer to midnight on the big clock. So that is why everybody has to grab every tool that they can. I mean, my job right now is to promote 18911 Truth, to talk about the World Trade Center evidence. I believe that by talking about this, I don't, I'm not at the forefront of the whole effort to save the world here, but I play my part and reminding people that they lied to you about that. They're probably lying to you about other things. Maybe we should pause and not go blindly into World War III. Maybe we should.
I just got off the phone with my representative in Congress, and I told the staffer, I said, look, there's a bill coming up to fund, I think it was 17 point something billion dollars for Israel. It was last week they were talking about 14.3, but it's up to 17 point something now for Israel. I said to him, I really don't want a representative, my representative in Congress, who is willing to send money to enable genocide. That means that my congressman has the blood of thousands, tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of people on his hands. I don't want that representative in Congress. So I urge Mark DeSaulnier in this case to think twice about his vote for this. It's going to make a difference, not only to me, but a lot of people who care about this.
Absolutely. We've done a lot of outreach to Congress on our issue too. I mean, part of the issue, I remember when I was a younger man, it was always some older guy with slick back hair that would jump in front of the congressman and say, okay, I'll take your information. And then that it never gets to him. Now it's like a young person, typically somebody who's like 20 jumping in there and saying, okay, please, I'll take this from you. And then they don't get it, because our members of Congress are insulated by a spongy membrane of polite chit chat, emails, and it's really difficult to even get access to them. When you do, it's always for some kind of phony photo op. They sit there and nod their heads, and then they go on doing the same thing over and over again. They know the towers on 9/11 were brought down in controlled demolitions. They've been presented the evidence, but they do not want to address it. We used to confront members of Congress on C-SPAN with direct questions about this, and they would do everything they could to weasel out of it. That is the state of our government. And I think at the heart of all of this, yes, it's a scientific battle to get our point out and refute NIST's claims about why the towers came down. And of course, it's a moral battle about what's going on in Palestine. But at the heart of everything, as I get older and older, I realize that this is a spiritual battle. And I'm not talking from the perspective of any particular religion. I'm just talking about that core ball of energy that sits inside of us, knowing what's right and what's wrong. And psychopathy is like a disease. It spreads as the crowd gets bigger. People accept it. I mean, during the pandemic, people would lecture each other about, trying to save lives of the people around them, right? But then, these are the same people who 10 years, and I'm not saying that's wrong either, but I would see that in some cases, they'd be the same people who 10 years before, when you're talking about depleted uranium being used by the US in Iraq, and I'll show all the pictures of the deformed babies, they would kind of laugh at you, look at you like you're a funny picture on the wall. So people's outrage is very selective. I think it's because of what gets programmed into them on television. If it's on TV, if they're saying it on TV, it's okay. Well, you have permission.
Television, Andy. Upton Sinclair, the muckraker of the turn of the 20th century, has a great quote. He says, it's really hard to get, he said a man, but a person, to understand something he's paid not to understand, and that fits our government employees. It fits our elected representatives and all the staffers that they have that are part of that. They're not going to understand because it's not in their interest to understand. If you ever watched Don't Look Up, did you see that? Did you see the film?
I know about it, but I have not yet watched it. No.
Yeah, well, I think I brought that to you last time as well, but it's well worth watching. It makes a really strong point about the way people behave. They behave each in their own interest and not in mutual interest so much, unless it happens to coordinate with their interests. And the result of that in Don't Look Up, well, I won't give you the whole story, but it's a great satire on human society driving its car over the cliff, so to speak.
Well, that's right. And the thing is, these things are in our mutual interest. I mean, it seems like, people just sort of look at their own, their day-to-day needs. I need to make my paycheck and all of this, and they don't look at the big picture, and then they're shocked when it all boomerangs back on them. And I believe karma is a thing. And I think we are now seeing the results of ignoring all of this World Trade Center evidence for so long. I'm not saying 9/11 was the first issue ever in world history. And I'm not saying that we were living in some kind of, Eden paradise beforehand, but it was such a blatant example of a mass murder right in your face. And they acknowledge it's a mass murder, but what the story we were told is obviously not true. And they can't even acknowledge like simple scientific points, to the point where now courts rule that government agencies are allowed to lie in their science-based reports. We're going to be taking on the Supreme Court on that very soon here, and challenging that notion. But it's sad that we even have to do this. It's sad that we have to have shows to discuss this when there are paid professionals on bigger venues that exist and can could be talking about these facts and just reporting them in a neutral way, but they don't. They push an agenda, and people have largely turned them off. Now, I want to ask you, because you've been at this for a very long time, and I'm trying to give encouragement to the 9/11 truth movement. I think people get discouraged. They stop watching the news. I go through periods like that myself. But they get discouraged. They start to lose hope, and they start to say, well, I don't want to get involved in this, whether it be the Palestinian movement or the 9/11 truth movement anymore, because it just does. The system doesn't seem to listen, and people don't seem to care. How tough has it been for you to stay on your issue for so long, and how do you combat that in your mind and keep active?
Well, for me, I guess it's therapeutic to. I find it very difficult to live with the things that I know without trying to do something about it. I do something about it because it's therapeutic. It keeps me from going crazy about the things that I learn and I know and all this sort of thing. So if that motivates enough people, and we see that when the crowds begin to grow against the war in Iraq, against the genocide in Gaza and all this sort of thing. We've seen the large crowds, and I think they feel a need to do something, and that's the key. Doing something. Obviously, the people of Gaza, Hamas, were strongly motivated to do something because they're trapped. They're living the existence. It's like as has been said many times, it's an open air prison, and many of them, most of them, never leave that tiny enclave of Gaza during their entire lives. So that is what motivates them, and if we can get the families, we already have some, but the families of the victims of 9/11 to understand what's going on, they're going to be very angry. And as I say, some of them are already. But that's going to motivate them to do something. And I hope that's true for everybody who's watching and whoever they're in contact with. But of course, not just that. I mean, the injustices are fantastic and unbelievable. The idea that for one thing, we've never had a general strike in the United States, a general strike where all the states, most of the businesses and operations are shut down for even a day. It hasn't happened, to my knowledge, in the history of the country. Whereas in France and Italy and Spain and other places, it certainly has happened, and they've kept it up until at least some of their demands are met. But it's never happened in this country, and I have some ideas as to why it might be the case. It's partly cultural, but it's also the fact that we're divided into 50 states. So they're keeping us divided, and they're keeping us ignorant through control of the media. And it needs a mass movement to be at least educated enough to understand that they're being crushed by the government, not by individual oligarchs. The oligarchs are behind the government, and they're working to crush us as part of it. But it's the entire system. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and also too, having the courage to not go along when things are not going in a moral direction. You know, I understand people in the media, for instance, we'll use them as an example. They work very hard, or maybe they don't. Maybe they have a connection in there. Depends on the individual case. But, you know, they did something to get there. They consider themselves very fortunate to be getting a large salary, to be famous, have people floating around them, doing their hair and all of these things. But if you put out some horrible propaganda piece that you know is going to contribute to the lies leading up to a genocide or a big world war, you got to have the courage to walk away and start all over again. Because at the end of your life, these are the kind of things that you're going to be thinking about and wishing you had done, that you had the courage to do at that point. And I think if more people did this in small ways, whether it's appearing to a boycott list. I know somebody whose little niece even knows about the boycott list and goes over all the products and can cite them. That is, all these people doing these small things, it leads up to a big impact. And that's really where you make your mark, is by refusing to participate, refusing to go along. Just that simple act can go a long way. In your career in activism for the Palestinian issue, because we want to be inspired by your story here, what do you consider one of your biggest setbacks that you ever faced?
Well, in a way, I guess the invasion of Gaza and the genocide in Gaza is a setback. But I wonder, it might not be. It could be the liberation of at least Gaza and maybe more than that, because honestly, I think Hamas and its allies have more staying power than Israel does. Israel is a basket case right now. The only thing keeping it going is cash from our pockets to theirs, and the bombs that we're sending them. But prior to that, in terms of setback, I would have to say that the 67 war counts as a major setback. The 67 war, because it actually gave Israel a legitimacy with the U.S. government. They saw that Israel's success in the Six-Day War in 1967 as a reason why maybe they're useful. Maybe they can help us to dominate the Middle East. And so the relationship which was there before 67 became much stronger as a result of 1967. That was a huge setback. I was much younger then, and I didn't fully realize it, but I certainly everybody realized it was a setback for the Palestinian cause.
Yeah, and I mean, I could say for the 9/11 Truth movement, a big setback. And again, it's not like we're up against an entity in the U.S. government and just the overall establishment. But I think the biggest setback right now is the fact that the internet is being so censored, not just for our issue, but for all other issues. It's a very cynically crafted system involving algorithms. Some of it I don't even fully understand, but they can downlist things. And the 9/11 Truth movement kicked off because people were able to freely share information on platforms such as MySpace. Then MySpace gets bought up by Rupert Murdoch, and suddenly this guy who's this business genius doesn't know how to run it, and it gets killed, and it's replaced by Facebook, which is highly controlled. And over time, they just tighten the noose around the neck of our ability to get information out. And this impacts our ability to get information out about what's going on in Gaza. Now, there is information getting out because there is such a worldwide uproar over this, and people are doing things. I forgot the name. I think it was, well, I can't remember the name of the group, but the group that occupied the Capitol over this, they were Jewish people saying, "Not in our name." They did this. And so, what is it called?
I thought you were talking about January 6th.
No. There was a group at the onset of the current assaults on Palestine that went into the Capitol in a very organized way, got into like a circle, like a big lump of
Jewish
people.
Voice for Peace. Yeah.
Yes, that was it. Okay, so there are people speaking out, and now we have South Africa just made a stand at the UN, calling the slaughter in Palestine and calling for it to be recognized as genocide. I want to get your thoughts on those proceedings, and I also want to know from your view if such mandates are really enforceable, especially since the U.S. and Israel does not like to cooperate with people that go against them.
Well, I think it has a lot of potential. The South African presentation at the World Court and other legal actions and consortia of nations and other groups together working together on this is all kind of in the right direction. But we have to distinguish between words and actions, because the ICJ, the presentation by South Africa was words, not actions. The ruling by the ICJ was words, not actions. And now Algeria says it's going to take it to the Security Council of the United Nations for actions, because the Security Council can authorize real actions, military actions for that matter. But that at the presentation of the proposal at the Security Council is more words again. And I don't think they're going to get past words, because you know as well as I do what's going to happen at the Security Council. The United States is going to exercise its veto. In fact, it's not even certain that any of the 5 veto powers will vote yes on such a thing, because not in their interest. Not even Russia and China. Russia and China are being accused falsely, in my opinion, of China is being accused of genocide of the Uyghurs, the Muslim province of China. What's the name of it? Xinjiang and Xinjiang. Russia is being accused of genocide in Ukraine. You see, so it's not their interest to vote against a genocide in Gaza. I don't know. It's conceivable that there will be no votes of any of the 5 members, permanent members of the Security Council, in favor of such a thing. So, unfortunately, the structure of power and the structure of human morality and public opinion and all that sort of thing are 2 different things. They run on different tracks, and that's the problem.
Well, my mother always said nobody does anything they'd rather not do unless they're afraid of something else. So something's got to motivate them. Same reason people get up and go to a job they don't like every day, because they're afraid of not paying their bills. So it's unfortunate, but something else has to motivate an entity or a person to go along with something they were previously opposed to, that may not have anything to do with morality. I want to ask you this because, in our circles in 9/11 Truth, people come up with suggestions, and I'm not criticizing at all, because people throw things out. They try to come up with ideas to tackle this major issue. And one of the things that comes up often from different sources, is a citizen grand jury. We're going to have a big showy thing. It's not going to have any power to enforce any actions from our government or compel them, but it will be a show, a symbolic display. I typically shy away from those because of its inability to do anything, but am I wrong there? Do symbolic performances like that have any kind of impact?
Well, let's go back to the dichotomy that I was talking about between actions and words. I'm saying that actions are what bring about results. And in fact, that's why Hamas is using actions where it once used words. It actually promoted nonviolent demonstrations, the so-called Great March. I think it was 18 months of demonstrations every Friday, and of unarmed citizens demonstrating against the occupation. And Israel just shot them down every week, and they kept it up, and it had no results. Okay, that was action that had was a kind of action, but it was mostly words. So Hamas is using actions now to cause pain to Israel, and thereby to get results. It might work, but can you imagine any kind of action? I can't imagine. I can imagine words divorced from action, but I can't imagine action divorced from words. You need words in order to create the actions, and so in that sense, I think a grand jury type of public grand jury or things like that are important in order to affect public opinion and educate the public and things like that. All of that is part of what needs to be done. But ultimately, if you don't think strategically in terms of large numbers of people doing exactly the same thing and mobilizing towards it, and with an understanding of what it is that will cause change, that is pain to the party that you want to implement the change. That's why I say a national strike that brings the economy to a halt for a certain period of time, that is going to motivate the government and the industries and even the oligarchs to reconsider what they're doing. But you have to inflict pain in one way or another.
Well, exactly. And again, this is not necessarily, calling for violence or anything, but refusing to participate in something in any way that you can. And I don't claim to have all the answers or the best strategy when it comes to that. I know, when we did the C-SPAN campaign, we were causing pain to the show by calling in and embarrassing these congressmen every day. And they have ended up, going along with what we wanted in the end and putting our representative on the show. It's things like that where you have a direct action, a simple action with a goal in mind that you can make the simple action stop if you get what you want. And we need to start thinking this way. And this gets back to what I was talking about before, because I was saying about how the internet is getting neutered, castrated, whatever you want to call it. It's not the same internet that we had in 2010 and such, where we could freely share information and talk to each other and affect things that go on. So now we got to get old school again. And the Palestinian movement has existed before there even was an internet. Talk about your experiences in that era. If we suddenly lose the internet, or it just turns into a glorified cable box, which it pretty much already is now, what can people in, the Palestinian movement, of course, but also in the 9/11 Truth movement do to get their message out, communicate with one another, and get actions going?
Well, I went to a great 9/11 presentation locally here in Oakland, California. It was excellent, and there was good attendance. It wasn't huge, but that's how it was done in the old days. You went and you talked directly to people. Zoom is a child of the pandemic, after all. When we didn't use it that much before the pandemic, but it's a useful tool. And so is social media. Social media, yes, it's under the control of a lot of it is under the control of the oligarchs. But what happens when it becomes under the control of the oligarchs? You get a new social media medium that comes out and profits from the people who have been knocked off the other, including me. I've been knocked out of X and Facebook. Well, I belong to what is it, to the V I can't think of the name now.
I'm at a loss.
Huh?
I'm at a loss. I can't guess.
I'll find it for you. Here. Telegram and VK, and there are other media that are popping up to make it available, and the audience is migrating to those bit by bit. Telegram is excellent. Telegram hardly censors anybody. You have to be really offensive to get banned from Telegram. And when I want to know what Hamas is saying and doing, I go to Telegram. So I think that's the way it's going to be. I think that whenever they try to shut down something or to control something, people are going to move somewhere else. So the social media, the internet, is a two-edged sword. It's an advantage for us in communicating and organizing, but it's also something that can be controlled by the authorities, and we have to deal with that. It hasn't been any different in the past with mimeograph machines and stuff like that either.
Right. And the thing is, I remember back in the old days of 9/11 Truth, for instance, there would be a bunch of different news sites. And when I say news sites, I don't necessarily even mean that they were creating their own content, but what you would have is whoever was running it would have a list of blogs that they liked, and they would just aggregate the various news stories. So if this one, Blog X, for instance, has a story they liked, they would provide a link to it on their own site, maybe post like the first couple of paragraphs and then say read more at the bottom. And then Blog Y has a story they like. And so everybody just sort of backed each other up this way. And I've noticed that a lot of this has now disappeared. So what I say to the 9/11 Truth movement is, yes, I mean, big organizations are important. It depends on maybe who's running them and what the intentions are. But also, don't be afraid to go out and create your own blog and create your own news aggregator sites. And that is just your little flag on the internet. And then, somebody has a story that you like, you post it there, and they post your story, and the information gets out this way. Even if, a particular person is not following every single blog out there, they're going to see it if it keeps on getting reposted. And we need to keep on, we need to remake these networks and not be just relying on Facebook and Twitter to get it out for us, create our own underground network on the internet that they cannot control. What do you think of that?
Absolutely. You're right on target. I agree completely.
Yeah, we got a lot of work to do. We let it get out of our hands, the internet, and I don't know what I could have done myself personally about it, or what the 9/11 Truth movement or other movements could do. But we need to adapt. If you don't adapt in nature, then you don't survive. You face extinction. So we at 9/11 Truth are focused on the scientific evidence of controlled demolition of the World Trade Center towers. Now, there is some people, I don't think they have good intentions. I think they're just going to complain about anything, but have complained about me talking about this Palestinian issue and don't want me reaching out to other issues, finding common ground with them, highlighting those issues, comparing it to our issue here at AE, which is the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence. And basically, finding that common ground, having these dialogues. I don't know. I mean, in your view, is there strategic value in finding this common ground with other causes, not directly related to the science of controlled demolition?
Well, we can't be too general or too specific. We have to have some of each. In the case of 9/11, for example, there are lots of indications that the Israelis were involved in the demolition of 9/11, specifically the Mossad, and that it was their people who were the technicians that set the explosives in the towers. And there are other indications as well. I mean, that how can you? They didn't keep it completely quiet. Nobody can keep it completely quiet. But if you want an organization that you can kind of trust not to spill the beans about what they're doing, it's an intelligence organization. It's black ops. Those are the people whose job it is to do something without opening their mouths. And that's exactly what Mossad does, and the CIA. These are the kind of people you need. And let's face it, the CIA and the Mossad work together. So this, and that comes from all the work that the Mossad has done, mainly against the Palestinians, but also in other countries. They've sabotaged and done assassinations in other countries as well. So from the very beginning, Count Folke Bernadotte from Sweden was assassinated in 1948 in order to prevent him from allowing the Palestinians to return to their homes after they were driven out by the Zionist militias and all this sort of thing. It's all connected. The question is, you can't expect to be equally involved with every bit of the connection because the connection never ends. But you do have to think about the fact that it's the same people and the same kinds of people who are the masterminds and criminal elements almost everywhere. The people who are in power, and we need to be in a way working together to overcome that. I belong to a group that's headquartered in Lebanon called the Global Gathering to Support the Choice of Resistance. It's part of what has been called the Axis of Resistance. And the Axis of Resistance is one that finds common ground for resistance in various countries, and they work together, and that's helpful. Now, there are members of the Axis of Resistance. Even in the Palestinian resistance, you have Hamas, you have Islamic Jihad, you have the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. and so forth. You have several groups. Hamas is the biggest, but you also, they are allied to a large extent with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah is allied with the popular mobilization units in Iraq, and they're allied with Syria as well, and obviously Iran. Iran is the big one that is kind of the one that the other movements go to in order to get technical help and things like that, and for coordination and all that sort of thing. So this is all part of resistance, but the resistance goes, and there have been links to, for example, Venezuela and Bolivia and Nicaragua and Cuba and North Korea and so forth. I mean, they think about Niger in Africa and Burkina Faso and Mali. These are all people who have mutual interests and who can support each other, but they also have their own individual struggles, and that's understood.
That's right. You know, the way that I look at it is that, yeah, obviously you don't want to be aligning with every group that's putting something out there. You know, people saying that, you know, holograms at the towers or the world is flat or some nonsense like that. Or, you know, claiming that, you know, things that obviously happened didn't actually happen. However, in the case of what's going on in Palestine, nobody's saying it's not happening. You know, the argument is one side says, oh, this is fine. No, this is needed. And the other side says, no, this is wrong. This is mass murder. And the way I see what's going on now, this is just another result of our failure, not our failure at 8911 Truth, but our national failure to acknowledge what is basic scientific evidence, what is not arguable. I mean, they try to argue it, but they look foolish doing that. And so when they can't argue it, they just sort of hide behind this stone wall and hope that we go away. And then as that happens, the world breaks down. It breaks down geopolitically. It breaks down in the realm of civil liberties, economically. I mean, we have things going on as a result of the Patriot Act right now. I just had something happen to me. I'll get into it on another show. But the post 9/11 world is still alive and strong. And we are not going to go out from one of these things until we acknowledge basic science and we also acknowledge right and wrong.
Let me mention something that I meant to include in that list that I gave you, and that is Yemen. Yemen is, in fact, the only country of the 153 signatories to the Genocide Convention that was signed, when was it? In 52? It was very early. I mean, there were other signatories who came on board afterwards, but there are currently 153. One of them is Israel, and obviously it's not obeying the Genocide Convention. But all of the others, with one exception, are also not obeying the Genocide Convention, because one of the provisions of the Genocide Convention is that when a genocide is taking place, all of the members are obligated to do everything possible to prevent the means of committing genocide to be passed to the country or group that is committing the genocide. And the only one that's actually doing that is Yemen. Yemen is the only one that's complying with their obligations under the Genocide Convention to do everything in their power to stop supplies, bombs, even money or whatever, fuel, from getting to Israel, which enables them to commit genocide. It's the only one. And those who are trying to stop Yemen, like the United States, are acting against the Genocide Convention. They're breaking their word that they gave when signing the Genocide Convention.
Well, it all has to start with one at least, but others need to follow. And sometimes being the first follower is more important than being the leader, because it gives validity to that leader. Now, we're coming towards the end of the hour. I don't want to be all doom and gloom here, because that's not what I'm about in my personal life, and I don't want to go forward with anything but positivity, because I think that's what motivates people. I want you to tell us, in all of your work for the Palestinian movement, just like we have our supporters working so hard for 9/11 Truth, what is your most proudest accomplishment, something that you're really proud of that you were able to accomplish and further your cause, even if just a little bit?
Well, there's one thing that really stands out, and you probably know what it is. It's I've talked about it before, and that is the proudest day of my life. And I've said it in various speeches. Is the day we set foot when we traveled on two small boats to Gaza, into the port of Gaza, and we set foot in Gaza. I mean, that was huge. And it was, for me, I felt like, yeah, if I don't live another day longer than this, I've really done something worth it in this lifetime. It was the crowning achievement. I apologize to my kids and grandkids, but everybody's got kids and grandkids, and I love them dearly. But in terms of impact, I think we made a huge impact at that time. It was on all the news, and even the Western news, with its short memory. But it was an astonishing achievement, and I'm very proud of that. But it goes beyond that, and I would like to think that I and a lot more besides me will play a part in helping to end the genocide in Gaza, which is another huge event, and perhaps ending it permanently, so that the Palestinians are safe and free and have their country and are able to exercise their human and national rights, which will be corrupted like any other place, but at least it'll be their country.
Well, that is the spirit and the attitude that we need here in the 9/11 Truth movement, that we need to maintain here at AE 9/11 Truth. We have some big things planned, and of course, one of them is that we're going to the Supreme Court. We're going to take our case there, but even if they, throw it out, doesn't go our way, we've got some other plans to back that up. So we got to maintain the spirit that Paul is exhibiting right now for the Palestinian movement, because I think it'll all come together like two converging lines at some point. And I think this world is going to have a renaissance once various truths, including that of 9/11, is exposed. But Paul, thank you so much for doing what you're doing out there, and of course for coming on 9/11 Freefall today.
Andy, I love the stamina and the continuation and the longevity of the AE 9/11 movement, and from everything I can see, it's going to prevail. How soon, I don't know, but the Palestinians know something about sticking with something for a long time.